the previous videos, we mentioned about the assessment rubric for the proposal defense. It is basically a tool used by the examiners to evaluate your performance as well as the quality of your thesis proposal during the proposal defense. You know that assessment rubrics will clearly outline the scope and expectations which you need to achieve in order to fulfill the requirements and standard as required by the School of Postgraduate Studies. Normally, these assessment rubrics are made transparent to the students, and you should go through the assessment rubrics before you submit your thesis proposal and before the proposal defense. Different universities may have their own assessment rubrics, and the one that we discuss here are some examples of the assessment rubrics. The criteria may be different, the scores and rating may be different, the format may be different, but the principle is applicable across the board to all kinds of rubrics. We also discuss about how do we interpret the criteria and levels of performance as described in the rubrics. Normally, those statements are made to explicitly differentiate different levels of performance without any ambiguity, and you need to look into the keywords distinguishing different levels of performance in accordance to those keywords. You might need to interpret the keyword yourself so that you have some ideas, the actual expectations as reflected by the assessment rubrics. So far, we have discussed two examples of the assessment rubrics, which is related to the title of the research as well as the literature review. Now we should proceed with the rubric for the problem statements, which in accordance to the example here, there will be 10 marks allocated for the problem statements. The ratings are listed here. Based on the rating here, you know that each rating will be equivalent to 1 mark. There are 4 levels of qualities as defined by the statement listed here. We shall look into it one by one. First, the problem statement is vague and or wrongly defined. No rationales and justifications for research gap. In this case, your problem statement is unclear or it is totally defined wrongly, which is not relevant to your research or cannot be resolved even though you have completed the research. Or you interpret the problems wrongly, which you are unable to identify the root cause. And then you do not provide sufficient rationales or justifications for the research gap. More specifically, you do not provide any rationales or justifications for the research gap. The relevant ratings are given here. Next, problem statement is not properly stated or minimum analysis of problem with little rationales and justifications for research gap. This one is better than the first one. You do specify the problem statement, only that it is not properly stated. The problem may be right, just that it is not precisely stated, or there are some ambiguity in terms of the problem statements, or there is no analysis for the problem. The problem did not really being diagnosed properly, and you provide some rationales and justifications for the research gap, just that it is insufficient, little rationale and justifications. Higher up, it will be problem statements is clearly analyzed with moderate rationale and justifications for research gap. Now your problem statements is clearer. You actually did some analysis for the problem, and the rationales and justifications for the research gap now is slightly better, which is at the moderate level, and And the highest quality here, it will be the problem statement is properly described with sufficient contextual detail, very clear rationales and justifications for research gap. Now your problem statement is clearly described, precise, and with sufficient contextual detail. That means it's supported with facts and figures, and the details demonstrate a good diagnosis and analysis of the problem, and you also provide very clear rationales and justifications for the research gap. Now if you look at the components, you know that stating and defining the problem itself is only going to give you poor marks. Only when you provide rationales and justifications, then your marks will be better. And when you actually demonstrate analysis of the problem, now the quality of your problem statements is better, and you are able to describe it properly and with sufficient context of details. That means they are good analysis, presented in proper terms, supported with facts and figures, and the details are given, demonstrate good efforts of word, that you really look seriously on this problem statement, then you are able to score good for your problem statements. Further explanations in terms of the keywords. State and define means that you identify the problems. Justifications for research gap means that you know the limitations of the existing knowledge and you know the research gap. Rationale, you need to clearly state the necessity of the research as well as the significance of the problem. Sufficient contextual details, that means you are related to relevant situations, know the implications, know the parties affected, supported with facts and figures which are undeniable, properly described. That means you're talking about the right problem, appropriate term, and know the nature of the problem. You may have your own interpretations in terms of the word use. This one is meant for your further understanding. Next, we look at the rubrics for the research objective and scopes. This one, it will equivalent to 10 marks. Based on the rating here, you know one rating will be equivalent to 1 marks. Now let us look into the descriptions. The research methodology is wrongly defined and planned, absence of data collection method, no procedures of technique or experimental setup. That means your research methodology totally cannot work, which is wrong defined and wrongly planned. You wanted something, but your research methodology would be something else. You don't have any mechanism for you to collect the data. Absence of data collection method. You don't provide procedures or techniques or experimental setup. That means no relevant information is provided. You need to know that in your proposal, all this need to be properly stated. Whichever not being stated, it will be automatically assumed that it is not in your research design, or it simply means that you are not aware of it. The examiner cannot assume that you are aware of it unless you have those properly stated in your proposal. Next level higher up, the research methodology, procedures, techniques, experimental setup is not clear, unclear data collection method, inaccurate choice of sampling design. Now you have the research methodology here, but it is not clear. It is very hard to judge whether you are going to do it right or you are doing it wrongly. And your data collection methods is also not clear. That means there is data collection, but nobody knows how you're going to collect the data. Inaccurate choice of sampling design. That means your sampling design may not be able to yield the answers that you're actually seeking for in order to answer your research questions. Next, research methodology is clear, but with unrealistic approaches, some deliverable may not be measured. At this level, you have your research methodology stated, and it is clear, but it may not be realistic, or it is not as optimized, it may not be thorough, and not everything can be properly measured. That means there is still some flaws within your research methodology. Next, very clear data collection method, highly accurate choice of sampling design, very clear procedures or techniques or experimental setup. Now you really know how you're going to conduct your research. You know how you're going to collect the data, and they are clearly presented. And your choice of sampling design is highly accurate, no redundancy, and your sampling design really reflects the situations which you intend to study, and you have the procedures and techniques or experimental setup very clearly specified. That means it is easy for somebody else without any prior knowledge to replicate the testing program. It provides a sufficient guide to you in future when you want to proceed with your investigation program. Now let us look into the elements as reflected by the rubrics. It should be properly defined, planned, clear, measurable, realistic, and accurate. Having those defined and planned only allow you to score lower marks. Things need to be clearly stated, and it should have good characteristic of methodology. That means measurable, realistic, and accurate. Then you may break down further to understand further the meanings of every single keywords. You are talking about plan, that means systematic sequence, mitigations or potential challenges. Define, that means you provide proper definitions. Measurable, that means you have degree of good and bad reflected in numbers, which is in the objective manner. Realistic, that means you're talking about logical, workable, realizable, and no redundant. Accurate, you're talking about right sample size, representative samples, no redundant, no repetitions. Clear, that means adequate details of data collection method. Next, we look at the rubrics for the significance of study. This gives you 10%, and the rating, it will be 1 rating for 1% marks. Let us look into the descriptions. Identify works have been attended before, no significance of study. Further up, existing similar works have been attended before, vague significance of study. That means you have identified the words that have been attempted, but we don't see the significance of your study, and those words may or may not be relevant to you. You only identify the respective word. Now, more refined conditions. You know the similar words that have been attempted before, but the significance of study is not clear. Next, similar words exist, but differences have been described clearly. Now you know the existing word, and you also demonstrate the differences between your works and the existing words. That means now you are in the process of identifying the research gap. That will be a part of your significance of the study. Next, The proposed research work is significant to address contemporary problem, can be used to resolve lingering questions or gaps in knowledge in the field of study, may influence public policy. In this case, we can see that there are definitions in terms of the significance of study. Your proposed work is significant, and it is actually addressing the contemporary problems. That means this problem is current and it is relevant. It is related, faced by certain parties or certain society, and the problems are valid. And your research work can be used to resolve the questions or the gap in knowledge of the field. That means you are actually filling the gap, or you are actually meeting the purpose of the research, solving a research question. And another one, it must be impactful, and the degree of impactful, it is reflected by influence to the public policy. This represents the highest level of the significance. That means your research now is going to be something like game changer at the most ideal situations. Now let us look into the meaning of every single word, which you can try to interpret those. First, novelty. That means no identical existing words. There will be differences with the existing words, as reflected in the statement in the rubrics. Resolve. That means you are addressing and rectifying some problem, and this problem is going to be contemporary problem, which is happening currently, and seeking for solution. Significant. It means something important, and influence public policy. That means it represents the degree of impactness. Next, we look at the rubrics of overall presentations. There will be elements of good presentations being assessed by the examiner for this proposal defense. However, the contributions is not that big as compared to the technical part given by the previous rubrics. Those overall requirements for the presentations include interesting to read and visually pleasant, proper presentations of charts, diagrams, tables, and references, layout, format, and outline of the reports are consistent with the requirements, free from spelling mistakes and grammatical error, and expected result logical and justifiable. The rating will be given by 1 for each criteria. Normally you will expect when 1 marks is given, the examiner may go for half of the smallest interval for those rating. That means it's between 0, 0.5 marks and 1 marks. Good thing for you to look through the assessment rubric. You know the requirement. You know the higher standards as expected by your School of Postgraduate Study. And then you know that the scope that you need to cover for your thesis proposal and your proposal defense. Also, you know whether you're going to pass or going to fail your proposal defense before you actually went for the proposal defense. It will be very much dependent on how you're going to interpret the rubrics. Are you able to interpret it correctly? Based on what we have discussed from several examples of assessment rubrics, you know that the rubrics is not just compilations of certain words without much meaning. Every single word carries significant amount of information, and this will help you to properly prepare your thesis proposal as well as the proposal defense. Another advantage of having the rubrics known, you know where are the critical areas. There are portions with more marks, and there are portions with insignificant contributions in terms of the marks. That means the emphasis of the assessment, you know where are the focus. You shouldn't spend too much effort on something that can yield you very little increment in terms of the marks. Instead, you should spend more effort to those giving you more impacts. And normally, based on our experience, students easily lost their focus. They spend too much effort, spend too much time on something which is less significant and not really emphasized by the school or postgraduate study, and miss the more important part, making them to not able to score well during the proposal defense. You have to think about it. It will be good for you to really go through the rubrics. At least you have a feeling, you come well prepared. You know that you're going to do well if everything goes in accordance to your plan, that you try your best to meet the highest levels of requirements as stipulated by the school or postgraduate study. And then, based on the questions asked by the examiner during the Q&A questions, more or less you have an idea what the examiner is trying to do. That means he's trying to measure something. He is looking for answer for something. Probably he would like to clarify or differentiate your performance between two different levels of quality which you happen to be falling in between. If you can do it well, most likely it's going to increase a bit to the higher levels of quality. If you don't do well, probably you're going to stick with the lower level of quality. And then another good thing about it, if you know how the examiner thinks, based on the question being asked by the examiner, you don't see every question to be very critical. You know that there are some areas going to contribute more impacts to the marks that you can score, because the scope focusing on the area where carry a larger portions of marks. Therefore, you don't get yourself sweating over small question which you know that not going to cause you any critical impact if you cannot answer it well. Of course, you should try your best to answer everything, just that now you have a better idea what is your positions, what the examiner is trying to do, knowing yourself and know your examiner. This will increase your chance of scoring well during your proposal defense. It will boost your confidence when you do your proposal defense, and this confidence can easily be detected and observed by the examiners. Imagine if you come well prepared. This one is also very easily detected by the examiner. The examiner knows that you know how to read the rubric. You know what they are trying to do. They will feel more impressed knowing that this student is really something. This is going to yield a better outcome in terms of your proposal defense. With that said, I would strongly encourage you to really look into the rubrics if the School of Postgraduate Studies make it transparent to you. It can be a very important tool to you, and it's going to help you in various aspects.